Hi, my name is Ethan. I am an educator for the Cheehaw Park and Zoo, the Flint River Aquarium, and the Thronatisca Heritage Center, which are all part of the Artesian Alliance here in Albany, Georgia. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about kind of an interesting subject. Uh, the concept of sort of man versus nature and how it affects things. So let me share a screen here with you guys. So we're going to talk about human impact on the natural world and um, how we impact the natural world, how it can hurt the natural world, and also how we've been working to fix our impact on the natural world and ways that we can keep our impact low or even beneficial moving forward. So keep things really good moving forward. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about humans. So the world currently has a population of roughly 7.674 billion humans all living on the planet together. That is a huge number. 7.674 billion is actually more than I can properly fathom, like just in my brain. Uh, that would be a billion is 1,000 millions. So and a million is 1,000 thousands. So or it's 1,000 thousands, yeah. So it's kind of crazy. Um 7.64 billion is such a huge astronomical number. So let's talk about how humans have actually been growing. Our population has been booming like crazy. It's whew, just taking off. Um, in 2010, we only had a population of 6.9 billion on the planet. So we've gone up by almost a full billion in only 10 years. In only 10 years, we've gone up by almost a full billion. Um, about 700 million, we've gone up. In the year 2000, it was 6.1 billion. So in just those 10 years, in just that 10-year span of time, it was about an 800 million jump. In 1990, it was 5.28 billion. So once again, an almost billion person jump between 1990 and 2000. Between 1980 and 1990, it went up by also almost a billion. It was only at 4.4 billion at the beginning of 1990 or 1980, I mean. And then in 1970, it was actually less than half of what it is today at 3.7 billion. Um, so, like, it's absolutely crazy. My parents are in their 50s. They have witnessed the world double in population in one lifetime. So it's something to really think about. Think about how, as you guys grow older, um, the population's gonna only increase from here. Can you imagine having double the population whenever you get older? Now I kind of skipped back a few more years here. Um, in 1900, it was a population of 1.65 billion, and in 1800, it was about 978 million. So between the year 1800 and the year 1900, we managed to break a billion and go over it. But literally between the year 1900 and 2000, we had a population growth of 4.5 billion people on this planet. There are more people living on this planet now than even existed um, a century ago. So it's absolutely crazy to think about. So as our population grows a ton, we use more and more energy. You use energy for everything in your life. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But I wanted to think of a fun way to represent how much energy we use. So worldwide, we use 575 quadrillion BTUs, which stands for British Thermal Unit. And that was in 2015. We probably use even more today. And one British thermal unit is roughly equivalent to 1,055 joules. So I thought, how do I make this extremely abstract number make sense to you guys and to me, really? Because I can't fathom 540 or 575 quadrillion anything. Um, so I know that a toaster uses about 67,500 joules to toast bread. So I calculated what 575 quadrillion BTUs of energy would be if it was in terms of sliced toasted bread. And I got 8.987 quadrillion toasted slices of bread. It's a crazy number. A quadrillion is um uh it's 1,000 trillions, which is 1,000 billions, which is 1,000 millions, which is 1,000 thousands. uh so it's absolutely crazy. The number, the amount of energy that we use is insane. Imagine all of that bread, it would cover the earth. So what do we use energy on though? We use energy on our basic to fulfill our needs, right? So things like food, water, shelter, enrichment, so entertainment, activities that stimulate you, and energy. We'll talk about energy just in general here. So how do you get your needs? How much energy is involved in getting them? So I want you to think as we go through these, how do you get this specific need and how much energy do you use to get it? So food, um, where do you get your food from? I know I buy my food from the grocery store, or from, say, a farmer's market. So if I buy, say, strawberries from the grocery store, well, I got those strawberries from the grocery store and used a little bit of energy to bring them home with me. I had to drive to the grocery store with my car, so I used gasoline to do that. I used gasoline to come back. The strawberries got transported to the store using gasoline. Then they had to be kept cold with refrigeration, which uses electricity. I could talk about all the energy that went into making the refrigerator, but it got taken. These strawberries got pulled out by a workforce who was working to get them pulled out. They required energy to grow. Farmers needed to plant them, and that required energy as well. Just all kinds of sources of energy went into making just this thing of strawberries. So there's a lot of food involved, or there's a lot of energy involved in making food, right? Um, Agriculture, so things like farming and stuff, actually, about half of all the land on planet Earth is used for agriculture. Um, and agriculture is a man-made thing. We invented agriculture. Nothing was naturally just sort of growing in wheat fields and stuff, right? So anywhere that there is farmland, there used to be something that wasn't farmland there. So think about it. About half of all of the land on the planet was something else, but is now farmland. So it's really important to think about just how much habitat we use, how much resources we use just to grow our food. So if we're not very careful with how we get our food, and where we get it from and how we raise food, like plants and animals and things, we can cause a lot of harm to our natural environment. So it's often a source of habitat destruction, and it gets complicated because on one hand, we don't really want to hurt anything, right? We don't want to dig up land that belonged to some animal, just so that we can plant food, but at the same time, we need that food to survive. So it's very important that as we plant new food and as we get our food, that we're getting it from a place that it makes sense to get it from, and we're not being wasteful and harmful with our food. So a lot of energy goes into food, right? But it doesn't have to stay with the food. There are things that we can do related to food that can help it. So things like composting, for instance, which is whenever you take leftover food and you just let it break down into soil, and then you use that soil to plant new food. So it ends up working out really well. It's like recycling, but with dirt. And then there's also things like only using pesticides sparingly or not using pesticides at all. And actually, I want to talk about a specific animal here that got affected by a pesticide use, the bald eagle. So there was once this pesticide, and a pesticide is something that kills pests. So Like an insecticide kills insects, and a fungicide kills fungus, and a rodenticide kills rodents. And all of these are to try to keep plants healthy while they're growing so that, animals and plants and things don't eat them before we get a chance to. And for a very long time, we used a special pesticide called DDT. DDT is what it was called. And that actually stands for diethylene dimethylene tetrahydrate, but that's neither here nor there. It's DDT, and it caused a lot of problems because while it was very effective at getting insects not to eat plants, it ended up getting into sort of everybody. There's a trace amount of DDT in every living organism that exists nowadays. And the DDT was actually making bald eagles unable to give birth to lay eggs. Their eggshells were super thin and they were just dying before they could even hatch. So how did we fix that? We just banned the use of DDT and found alternative ways to use pesticides. We found different pesticides, and now the bald eagle population is actually booming. It's very rare that I go out near a river or stream and don't see a bald eagle. So it's actually a huge success story. So it just goes to show that as long as we're being careful about how we manage ourselves, we can cohabitate with other animals. We can do things like that. Now, I wanted to show you guys an animal today, and it's a mammal. And I wanted to talk about it because it relates to food. And because it's a mammal, I want to get myself all safe so that I don't spread any germs to my mammal. So this guy, let me see if I can tilt the screen down a little bit. This is a guinea pig. This guinea pig's name is Hershey, because he's chocolatey. He's black and white. He reminds us of Hershey's chocolate. And guinea pigs are a pet nowadays by most people, but actually started as a source of food. They originally lived in the Amazon rainforest, and people hunted them and ate them, and they realized that they thought they tasted delicious, and it actually became a hot commodity to have guinea pigs around so that you could eat them. And as a result, guinea pigs became a huge pet. And actually, nowadays, you don't even find guinea pigs in the wild anymore because of just how much they were taken from the wild and used as food. And nowadays, as pets. But they're kind of an example of an animal that it's okay. He hears a bee. There's a bee buzzing around. So he's a little bit concerned. But they're an example of an animal that was completely and totally removed from their natural habitat due to food. So they are actually an example of, nowadays, obviously we keep them as pets and we don't tend to eat them. But they started out as a food source for people, and they were actually such a popular food source that we completely and totally got rid of their natural population. The only guinea pigs that exist nowadays are in captivity. So that is what I had to say about this guy. Eat all over me, as they do. So, as I was saying, that was food. Now let's talk about water. How do you get your water? Usually from the tap, right? Tap water is the most common kind of water I think that we encounter. But did you know that of all the water in the world, only about 3% is fresh, and only about 0.5% of all the water in the world is usable by us? So it's found in streams and rivers, and is easily accessible and is fresh. And something around 70% of all people on this planet live within 3 miles of a body of water of some kind. And I want you to think for just a minute. What's the nearest source of water that you are at right now? For me, it's the Muckley River, just over there a little ways. And all sources of water are connected with one another. Rivers flow into larger rivers, which flow into oceans. Ponds and streams and lakes and other things flow into other bodies of water. It all interacts with one another. So any action that you take with one source of water affects all other sources of water. So it's extremely important that we keep them clean, right? But for a very long time, we didn't try to keep them clean. And now we're sort of suffering because of it. You might have heard of things like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is this very large section of ocean in the Pacific that is just filled with garbage. It's just floating around in there. For a very long time, we dumped trash just right into the ocean because we thought, oh, the ocean's big. It'll be fine. But then it all just washes back up onto the shore. Even things like what we do to rivers and streams nearby will eventually end up in the ocean and then will affect us. So it's very important that we're very careful with how we interact with water, right? If we pollute water, it will pollute us right back because we need it to live. So it's just very important to deal with. Now, I want to talk about a sort of success story with water. Probably a really big one is actually the Clean Water Act in the United States. There are laws that say that all water from your tap has to be drinkable. And that's just not true in most other parts of the world. In most parts of the world, tap water is not necessarily drinkable. So it's very, very impressive that the United States is able to say that their tap water is drinkable. Another success story related to water is actually whales. For a very long time, we used to hunt whales for oil. And after a while, whales became so scarce. They became so rare that it became almost impossible to hunt them anymore. And they were almost extinct. But nowadays, their populations have been slowly coming back from what they were. And so you'll see whales. You'll actually be able to see whales nowadays, thanks to efforts by people who just decided not to hunt whales anymore. It stopped being lucrative. It stopped being a business that they could rely on. And so people moved on to different sources of business, and the whale population was able to grow. And we're very thankful that it did, because if we just kept hunting them, there probably wouldn't be very many species of whale around today for you to enjoy. All right, let's talk about shelter now. So we've talked about how you get your food and your water and all of the energy involved with that. Now let's talk about shelter. And space just in general. So housing in residential neighborhoods can cause habitat destruction. So can things like building other sort of stuff like restaurants and other things like that. They all can cause habitat destruction. It's whenever you put something into nature that didn't belong there already. So like, let's say that there's a new restaurant opening up on the edge of town. Well, what was on the edge of town? A forest. Well, now the forest is a little bit smaller because there's a new restaurant opening up. Things like yard work from housing in residential neighborhoods can cause things like algae blooms because of all the fertilizer you're using. It makes the water absolutely filled with junk, and that junk can cause huge algae blooms. And other animals like cockroaches and raccoons and things have adapted to living in these destroyed habitats by just living alongside humans. And there are tons of invasive species that follow humans around. And then whenever they get here, they just destroy all of the natural habitat that they wouldn't otherwise be involved with. So humans can cause a huge amount of damage through habitat destruction. In fact, habitat destruction is the single greatest driver of extinction. More animals are going extinct because we have destroyed their habitat than because of anything else. And I actually want to show you guys an animal that is affected by habitat destruction, but I think it is just the coolest. I'm actually going to have to probably back the camera up a little bit here. Give me 1 second. This is an indigo snake. Indigo snakes are extremely cool. Um, they are the largest snake in North America, and they can get up to 7 or 8 feet long. It's hard to really tell in just a camera here, but these guys can get up to 7 or 8 feet long, and they are big fans of moving around a lot. And I'm sure as soon as she gets a little bit warmer here, um, or as soon as he gets a little bit warmer here, he'll be moving around like crazy. But indigo snakes, because they're such a massive snake, they actually are really affected by habitat destruction. Habitat destruction affects larger animals a lot more than it would other kinds of animals, like smaller animals, because think about it. If you're large, you need more space. So if that space gets destroyed, then you have nowhere to go. So indigo snakes are kind of famous because they eat rattlesnakes. They're partially immune to the rattlesnake venom. And so they don't really get affected if they get bit by rattlesnakes, and they will just eat rattlesnakes just all the time. Um, and so um, they live, their natural range is anywhere from Florida over to Louisiana, and they live in the southern parts of those states. Ugh. And oh boy, stay in the frame here. And but nowadays, they're threatened, they are endangered, and um, they only live in Florida and parts of Georgia. And actually, they're considered extinct in the states of Mississippi and Alabama, just in their entirety. So they really only live in a few places now. And the reason why is because of habitat destruction. Um, they are not really good at adapting to new environments. And so whenever their habitat gets destroyed, they just don't survive, they just die. Um, so these guys are so cool, and they are a great reason to try to be careful with how you handle habitat destruction. So how do you manage to avoid habitat destruction if you live somewhere? Well, you can do things like just being a lot more careful with where you build buildings, how you build buildings, and also just being mindful of what lives around there. So, like for instance, if you have to cut down a tree, and you know that a bird lives in the tree. Um, getting like a substitute tree of some kind, or picking a different tree to cut down if you have to cut down a tree, or just not cutting down the tree at all, are all options to try to keep habitat destruction to a minimum. You can also prevent, because habitat destruction also is usually followed by invasive species coming in. You can keep invasive species from coming in by just being really, really careful to not let them in the first place. So there are rats. Rats are a great example of this. Everywhere that humans live, rats do as well, except in the province of Alberta in Canada. In Alberta and Canada, there are no rats. And the reason why is because they were just very careful as they were settling the area not to bring rats in. And actually, every year they spend a bunch of money to make sure that rats don't move in nowadays. Um, so it's possible to even keep things like rats from invading an area. So there's absolutely places that you can keep things like invasive species and habitat destruction to a minimum. I am going to put this indigo snake back here because he is making a knot around my legs, and I would really like to put him back before he starts really moving. Okay. Another thing that humans need, and it's one that you don't really think of very often, is enrichment, entertainment, stimulation. It's why we do more than just eat and sleep, you know? Um, and usually our entertainment requires huge undertakings. So like sporting events, think about how much is involved just in planning, say, like a big sporting event. You need to be able to provide um, a way for thousands of people to get there. So maybe parking lots and transportation and things like that. You need to have some place for them to sit and watch the game. You need the players to play the game. You need the equipment to play the game. You need the facilities to be running. You need toilets. You need food. You need water and other drinks to keep people satisfied. You need some kind of entertainment for the sort of dull moments in the game. There's all kinds of stuff that you would need for it, and all of them require energy. And another thing um, that happens pretty often is legal and illegal wildlife trafficking. So um, it's a really, really huge industry. It's actually a several billion-dollar industry is in illegal pet trading. So as humans are seeking stimulation and entertainment, you might want a pet. I don't blame you. I always want pets. I have a pet at home. I have a little pet gecko, um, and some snakes. Other people have dogs and cats and things like that. And sometimes you want something even more exotic than that. Maybe something really interesting, like say a tarantula or something. Well, people will sell it to you, but you might not necessarily be getting it from a good place. It's very important whenever you are looking at buying a pet that you get it from somewhere that is what's known as ethical. So someplace that got it through without hurting anything. They got a hold of it. Either they bred it themselves, or it was a rescue from somebody who was treating it poorly, or things like that. And I actually have an example that is often bought unethically right here. So this is a Chilean rose-haired tarantula. Chilean rose-haired tarantulas are very cool, very, very pretty spiders. They're often sought out by pet owners to use as sort of like these sort of display pets, something to look at, something that looks pretty that they like to stare at. But the problem is almost all of them are caught from the wild. So tons of people are buying them and they're all being caught from the wild. What do you think's happening with the wild population? It's going way down. Now we got ours from somebody who bred it. So we got ours in captivity. So ours was got ethically. But if you're ever buying or selling a pet, you need to make sure that you acquire it in sort of an ethical means, because otherwise you might be stealing a pet from the wild. And that's not really a pet, that's just a wild animal you're keeping in a cage. Or you might be getting your pet illegally, which is also a big problem. Um, Other things that pose problems from just enrichment is places like recreation areas, like beaches and stuff. They can seriously hurt animals that live there because that's a natural habitat for other animals. But we use it for recreation, and sometimes they clash. So actually, sea turtle populations have been going down and down and down for years and years and years now. But we've started to take some serious efforts to try to keep the turtle population alive, the sea turtle population alive, by doing things like turtle watch programs out on the beaches, where literally somebody just wakes up early in the morning every day before beachgoers come out and checks for any turtle nests. And if they find one, they section it off and make sure that it's safe, so that all of those turtles get a chance whenever they hatch and go out to sea. Things like that. Uh, and then finally, there's energy. We get our energy from a lot of different ways. Some ways are better than others. So not all energy is renewable. Some energy causes pollution. Some of it causes habitat loss. Some of it is renewable, though, like wind and solar and geothermal and hydroelectric. These are all examples of renewable energy resources. So renewable energy resources are replenished. They come back. We can use pretty much an unlimited amount of energy from them because they will always have more energy to give us. And for the longest time, non-renewable energies were what most people used, but actually in the last 2 years, for about 2 years now, renewable energy resources have surpassed non-renewable energy resources in the United States. We use more renewable resources than we do non-renewable for the first time in human history, which I think is awesome. So how do we care for nature? Because as I've sort of explained here, it's not really a man versus nature thing, is it? It's more like a man and then nature gets hurt kind of situation. So how do we care for nature? So with food, we be mindful of where we're getting our food, what we're getting it, where we're like, who's giving it to us, what the impact of our food is. So things like cows have a lot bigger footprint energy-wise than say corn, you know. Water, so don't waste your water, don't pollute water resources because we only have the water that we have, right? It's not very much. So if we ruin it, it becomes unusable and then we can't do anything with it. Shelter, so we can do things to try to prevent habitat loss by planting native plants in our yards, not overusing our fertilizer, dealing with pets in a way that doesn't make them extremely sick. So like not using DDT and things like that to kill pests instead. If you can, relocating the pests, or if you have to, killing them in a way that doesn't hurt anything else. With enrichment, we can practice leave no trace. So if we go to places like the beach, anything that we bring to the beach, we take back from the beach. Anything we take into the woods, we take home with us. We can not pollute. Things like that. And then with energy, you can conserve energy in a whole lot of ways. You can do things like turning the lights out and not wasting water. And then you can also even go a little bit further beyond and do things like recycling and composting, which I described earlier. It's taking pieces of food scraps and turning them into dirt just by letting them sort of decompose. There's all kinds of ways that you can conserve energy. So that was my talk on man versus nature. And I hope I instilled the idea that it's not really man versus nature, is it? It's man and nature. And we need to find a way to work together because if we don't, both suffer. So I hope you had a good day and I hope you learned some stuff. And I will see you next time. Bye.